guys, welcome back to the show. Today, we have an interesting guest. She's younger than me. Oh my gosh, the only guest in this entire season who is younger than me. We have Frances Hui, and we have tried really hard to get her here, okay? It's been an ordeal because she's very busy. Frances, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it. And you got to Texas, all right? Have you ever been here before?
No, this is my first time.
Oh, very exciting.
I love it.
So you're in DC right now?
Yes.
And what are you doing? You're working in journalism?
Yes. I'm a freelance journalist, working for multiple companies here and there. And at the same time, my another full-time job would be my activism. So.
Oh, and why are you an activist? let's get right into it.
I started my activism for Hong Kong since I was 12, I believe. I was born and raised in Hong Kong, and the city has a call on me, I guess. And so I was involved in social movement when I was a student. And then eventually I got interested in journalism. And then I came to the US to study for 4 years, went back to Hong Kong afterwards. But then because of the new law in Hong Kong, that would put me in danger. And because of safety concerns, I have to leave the country and seek asylum here in the US.
Wow. Okay. And actually, you have a big announcement about that, right? Did something just happen with that?
Yeah. Well, last September, so September 2021, the U.S. government granted a political asylum, and I am officially an asylee in the U.S. now. Yeah. So, media is saying that I'm the first Hong Kong activist to be granted asylum in the U.S.
You're kidding. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, congratulations, and
Thank
we're really,
you.
I'll say it, we're really glad to have you here, and I think the more people like you that we have in this country, the better. So I'm really glad that you're here.
Thank you.
I don't even know where to begin on this one. There's a lot that we have to talk about. First things first, the American education system, not ideal. That's a nice way of putting it. And so we didn't exactly learn much about Hong Kong in the public school classrooms. And so do you mind providing the people that are watching this and listening just a brief understanding of the history of Hong Kong and the situation with communist China?
Right. That's a big question.
Yeah. Do your best, but it's okay.
Yeah. So I would try to keep it short, but Hong Kong was colonized by the British, and it was the colonization actually ended in 1997, and so the Hong Kong was officially handed over back to China. So the People's Republic of China. And so they took over Hong Kong with a promise that everything would stay the same for 50 years. So all the freedoms that we have during the colonization, freedom of speech, freedom of press, all that kind of freedom, and the rights of people who are living there stay the same. So it's interesting to see that, Hong Kong, even though being handed over to China, it's not entirely the same as the rest, mainland China, because as we know, China do not have any sort of freedom of speech. People have to live in some sort of restraint or oppression. So Hong Kong eventually, the civic society would eventually continue to blossom, and social movements happen all the time. And I was very fortunate that I grew up in that period of time because I was born in 1999, and when I was very active in social movements, that was the time when the civil society was in the peak. People who are for workers, people who have, we have different political parties. They would run for elections for the legislative body. And I was part of a student group which represents student voice at the time. So there was a time that democracy seems like would be something possible in Hong Kong. And we also have our own, government, even though it was still under the Chinese government. We kind of have a, separation of power, if I may say that. So it's a very interesting place. And I really, I'm very fortunate to be yeah, as I said, to grow up in that environment and learn what freedom is about, you know,
Yeah,
to
I mean,
live with
that's
freedom.
crazy.
Yeah, and a very, you know, fast change is that I think it's since, I would say 2019 is the key year of change when people start to realize, oh, you know, China is not letting us to live on our own. Like they're not living up the promise that they promised during the handover. They are trying to take away our freedom and to slowly grasp control over Hong Kong. For example, they're trying. Well, in 2019, there was a big movement that broke out because the Chinese government is trying to. They proposed an extradition bill that would allow criminals in Hong Kong to be extradited to China for trial. So we were worried that, you know, politicians or activists, journalists, lawyers would be criminalized for their speech, for their political involvement. And so it's very concerning, and people went on the streets. And at first it was not like a huge thing, but then because of excess, like, you know, police brutality, excess forces, that really got people very angry, and everyone went on the streets, and you see almost like 1/3 of the population went on the streets, and that's huge. The protest eventually lasted, I would say, you know, over half year, and people weren't stopping. And you know, kids were on the streets, like students were on the front line dealing with tear gas, rubber bullets, and it's insane to see Hong Kong changed from a very free city to that's a city of basically, you know, fire and bullets.
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope that kind of explain the history of Hong Kong.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people don't understand. It was basically westernized. It had all the freedoms of the Western world.
Yeah.
And then what led to England saying we want to no longer have this and we want to give it to communist China? And was it naivete, or was it something worse to assume that communist China would allow Hong Kong to stay the same, at least for the 50 years? I mean, to hand over all those people that had freedom for all their lives, someone like you grew up in freedom and then handed over to the Communist Party after knowing what they're capable of and what they do to their own people. What are your thoughts on that?
They actually have negotiations. It took years for the negotiation to happen. And during that time, the people of Hong Kong wasn't involved at all in this entire negotiation or discussion between the two countries.
Was it like behind the curtains and no one knew about it, or they just weren't included?
All of them were open. They have documents, they have treaties signed, but it was all just between the two countries. There's 3 parts in Hong Kong in general. Hong Kong Island, the Kowloon Peninsula, and then the new territories. So they actually own the Kowloon Peninsula and Hong Kong Island. And then for the new territories part, they only ran it for 99 years. And so in the time of 1997, that's the end of their rental. So that brings up to their mind is that, oh, that's the end of our think of it as a lease, right? That's the end of our contract, our lease contract. So we are no longer gonna own new territories. So, and then a step further is that, do we still want to like colonize Hong Kong? Do we still want the other 2 parts? And so that kind of triggered this discussion. And because of the idea of decolonization around the world, they realized it's probably time to, you know, decolonize the place and the people and to give it back.
Yeah. Okay, so...
But I would say that people are, you know, some people... I was not born at that time.
Yeah.
But people... have they're very kind of discontent about the not being involved in the negotiation because this is the fate of Hong Kong, and the people of Hong Kong were not involved in that process of thinking about democratize the place.
Yeah. So what kind of government structure do you know did they have when they were colonized, and how did that begin to change as they prepared to no longer be under England's rule?
Now it's I guess the highest rank of officials in Hong Kong is the chief executive, and back then it was the governor.
Okay.
And there were a governor that was appointed by the British government to manage the area.
Now I'm kind of curious. I know you weren't around then. I was born in 1996, and so I was very young at the same time too. So I don't remember this either.
Very young.
But I'm curious, did you hear anything from your family of, as 1997 is approaching, were people aware of wow, something really serious might be happening in our future and we should be prepared for it? What were you guys learning about communist China and what they were up to? And were you guys aware of the fact that you could be transitioned into Chinese control?
I mean, people are aware. I think at the time, I don't know if you have heard of the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Yes.
In 1989. That was a moment that people in Hong Kong kind of worry about the future of Hong Kong. Like, if we're gonna be handed over to the hand of the PRC, would this happen to us?
Yeah.
And it's a big deal to Hong Kong people at that time because, people in Hong Kong at that time they have freedom. They have their media, their platform to raise awareness about what's happening there. And it's I would say Hong Kong is kind of like a bridge between the China and the Western world, the international world in general. And so it was a big deal, and people felt really, I think people at that time, they have a connections with the Chinese society because they were still under colonization, and deep in their minds, some of them still have the spirits, the connections with China, and they believe that they're Chinese people. Unlike right now, people in Hong Kong, all of them will call themselves Hong Kongers instead of Chinese. So because of colonization, people in Hong Kong at that time, they still have the connections with China. They obviously felt really kind of sorry for people who suffered in the Tiananmen Square massacre. And jumping back to our case, is this going to happen to us in the future? And so I think, obviously, I think growing up, my parents didn't really tell me much about the history back then. But I, when we're in history lesson or when I watch documentary about what's happening in Hong Kong back then, I kind of learn a little bit. But I would say the education in Hong Kong, the education I grew up learning, didn't really involve a lot of the, information about that period of time.
Yeah.
Because they try to, I didn't realize it, but when I think back, it's kind of try to demonize the British government for colonizing.
Interesting. Do you think that had Chinese influences?
Of course, yeah, because they don't want people to stay in the mindset that the British colonization is better than
that makes sense.
Than Chinese.
It's
and
very
I
strategic.
believe that right now we're still being colonized by another country, which is the PRC. Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about learning about communist China? They were your neighbors. What did you guys learn about them when you were in school? Did you learn about the Cultural Revolution, the deaths, or?
Yes. As I said, I'm very fortunate because when I grew up, teachers and textbook, they're all kind of objectives, very objective, and maybe they will minimize the information that they don't want us to know. but it's really not that, like, there's not much efforts to try to censor the information provided to students. Unlike right now, like students at school, there are a lot of things like doctrines of the communist China are being put in the textbook, and they have to learn Mandarin. They have to, the first thing first, you have to learn the national anthems of PRC, and you have to bow in front of the flag. And probably every week you will watch the flag being raised in the playground. And that's just, for me, I think it's fair. I felt really sorry for kids that are growing up in that environment, honestly.
Yeah, that's really sad. So can you walk us, let's go back to that timeline of 1997 happens, this negotiation process has been going on for a long time. What did the transition look like, and what is Hong Kong now? Like, what was the final agreement, do you know?
The final agreement is to keep everything the same for 50 years.
Okay, but China, what does China, like, what is their role in Hong Kong?
Their role...
you described it as like being colonized once again.
Yes, I'm trying to pull up the phrase. It's they promised that Hong Kong would have a high degree of autonomy, which is a very fancy way of saying we still have control over you, but you got your own government, all that. You can have your own little government, but we're still in charge.
And the 50 years of
from
nothing changing.
1997 to here. And we're not even, are we even halfway? I don't think we're halfway, and we're here now.
Yeah. So what was your experience, and what was the policy change? Like when did things start to get pretty bad? Because I remember 2019 seeing what was going on, and everybody was talking about it. And I remember do you remember the meme of like, Hong Kongers are waving American flags, but American communists are here on our soil waving Chinese flags and Marxist Che Guevara shirts and all. They made a ton of online jokes about it and comments, but it's like more than a meme, right? There's something to be said about the fact that this became a worldwide story of what was going on. Did it start around 2019, or did things build up?
I would say no. So I actually started my involvement in social movement in 2012.
Oh, wow.
And that was the time my identity as a Hong Konger started to like grow. I started to realize I have a place in the city. It was the time when the Hong Kong government proposed an education scheme, which is a very patriotic education scheme in our education program. And basically, we call that a brainwashing program because there is like model answers for every questions. And if you're not, let's say the question is, I'm just making it up, but like the question is, what happened to 1989? Or they wouldn't even ask about it, honestly, but they would just like try to teach you all these things that is praising China, or like everything that is good about China. And if it's like basically you're taking religious studies and they're telling you Jesus is the best. You have to say that this is the model answer, right? Okay. And I think, at that time there is a wave of students protest because we don't want that. We don't want to be brainwashed.
And you started doing this in 2012?
Yeah.
So you were pretty young.
I was probably 7th grade.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most 7th graders in America would never consider anything like this. If anything, they're used as political puppets by the left here. But you came up in your own mind to the idea that you shouldn't be put through this, and you wanted to get involved?
Well, because I am the first hand being that would get brainwashed if that education scheme is implemented, right?
Oh, wow. And so actually, wait, before we do that, can you explain, was it Chinese influences in the Hong Kong government that were trying to push this through? It wasn't actual Hong Kong?
Oh, and I forgot to mention that the chief executive of Hong Kong, it's by election. It's chosen by election, but it's not elected by the people. It's elected by a selective committee
Oh.
And we say it's pre-approved by the Chinese government. And so eventually when this person is elected, they still have to be appointed by the Chinese government.
Okay. So it's technically representative government.
Yeah,
but
it's not
all
a
chosen
democracy.
by
Yeah,
the
they're
Communist
shaping
Chinese.
it as democracy. We have our election, but no, like the chief executive is being appointed by the Chinese government.
Okay. And so it was this Chinese infiltrated government in Hong Kong starting the education indoctrination.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Sorry to interrupt.
No, just to clarify. And at that time, there were hunger strike by students. Well, I was not involved, but there are people who were on the streets and protesting because that's the future of our students, it's the future of Hong Kong. And so they brought it to the streets and eventually forced the government to take the scheme down. That's like the time when, my world is being open. I realize if I have a place to protest, I can say things and I have the freedom to say whatever I want and then to bring some changes to the society.
Okay.
I would say 2012 was the time that people realized, the Chinese government is trying to get their hands in our education. But at that time, people are not so aware, even though there is like a huge social movement. And down the way, there's another mass movement in 2014, which is called the Umbrella Movement. It was known as the Umbrella Movement, and it lasted for 79 days. People occupied a main highway of the city and tried to pull down another election scheme proposed by the government again. It's actually it's implemented straight from the Chinese government. They have the executive power to do that.
Oh.
And so
that's very autonomous for Hong Kong.
and so people went on the street again, and a very brutal scene happens all the time with tear gas, rubber bullets trying to, rush out the crowds, and people come back again. But that was the time, I think the civil society was blossoming. A lot of the organizations was created after the movement, and there are people for this specific industry, and they create an organization for themselves and to represent the people who are working in that industry. And we have a lot of different organizations everywhere in the city, and it was great. And then 2016, we got two candidates. There are pro-independence candidates who ran for the legislative election, and they actually got elected.
But they weren't supported by the Chinese.
No. So when they sworn to their position, to their office, they were being disqualified.
Oh.
Even though they were elected by the people.
Okay.
And so that's another kind of like a jumping stones of building up to what's happening right now.
Yeah. So like clearly, basically education, indoctrination.
Yeah.
And then the attack of the protesters with the Umbrella Movement. Also, do you know why they called it Umbrella Movement? Do you know the backstory of that?
Because the police are trying to, how to say that? Like they try to clear the crowd using pepper spray and tear gas. And people just, there's nothing with them. They don't have any tools or like, they're basically unarmed. And people start to open umbrellas to shield themselves. And so you see pictures of huge crowd of umbrellas, like people building up the walls to protect themselves.
Wow.
And it's really, there are many powerful pictures online that you can see from that protest.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I knew the story of that, but I wanted you to tell it for everyone.
Actually, the Time magazine named it the Umbrella Movement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's really beautiful. And there is something so powerful about imagery
Yes.
in political movements and stuff. So we had the indoctrination of education of the kids. and then
The umbrella movement.
the umbrella movement, and then basically no more free elections. You now know that you can democratically elect someone, and they will be told, never mind, on the day they're supposed to be sworn in. That was 2016, you said?
16, yeah.
Okay.
That's
old
the time
you were like coming of age at this point, like teens?
That's the time I came to the US. I was 17, 16.
Okay.
Yeah. And then goes to 2019 when they introduced a new proposal of, setting up a extradition bill that would allow criminals to be extradited to China.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And then once you get sent to China, I mean, is there any accountability for where you go from there?
No,
And
because
that's kind of the point.
Well, the conviction rates in China is 99.9%. And you can imagine like a person being sent to China for trial, they would have no luck at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they have the rights to make it close. Like the entire hearing or the court can be closed door behind the curtain, and you wouldn't know what's going to happen to them.
Yeah. And we've interviewed, I was talking to you before we filmed,
Yeah.
Jennifer Zhang, and she talked about what it's like to actually get taken in by the authorities with no clarification of what you've actually done. And she was tortured, beaten, forced to work at the factories, and eventually got out, but it was a terrifying ordeal.
I bet, yeah.
And so I can only imagine what it's like to grow up in a Western free area and then have the communist regime come in and say that they want to start taking the free people or the once free people into the mainland where you'll probably never be heard from again. So where do you fit into this? So you, between 2016 and the extradition bill, you went to America for college?
Yeah, I was in Boston for college, and I was
lived in Boston
studying
for a little.
journalism. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I study in journalism. And when the 2019, so I was actually writing for my student newspaper at that time called the Berkeley Beacon. Basically, I wrote an article about my Hong Kong identity, which is called I'm from Hong Kong, not China. The title basically says everything. But in the article, I talked about the brief history of Hong Kong, why people in Hong Kong would have about the identity of being a Hong Konger instead of Chinese. And the issue at my school at that time is that like Hong Kong students and Taiwanese students, their voice is being marginalized because there are huge population of Chinese students in the school, which we can talk about that in U.S. education too.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I feel like a lot of the school in the U.S. they have received a lot of tuition from Chinese students.
Yes.
And so a lot of them fear of speaking up and to stand with the values of freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And protect students who are not from China, who are criticizing the Chinese government. And so basically, long story short, this article was published and I got a huge backlash from the Chinese students community.
Wow.
And the article was widespread around the world. And, obviously people, non-Chinese people who read the article applaud of, what I wrote. And people back in Hong Kong who read the article also felt really resonating with what I said. But people really got it really triggered the Chinese people for what I write. And that's how I was known. And then at that time it was April 2019, which is 2 months before the movement broke out. And when I learned about the extradition bill in Hong Kong, that's when I realized maybe I should take it further, use the exposure I have or the media I have to raise awareness about that. And so I organized protests in Boston and coordinate the protests around the world and try to involve the international community to be involved in this social movement, so that it's not just about Hong Kong. It's not just a movement by Hong Kongers, but it's supported by the international community, and they are aware of what's going on in Hong Kong and why this bill matters to the international community. So in 2019, I was a junior student at Emerson College. And then 2 years after that, so in 2020, I graduated and I went back to Hong Kong. At that time, the movement kind of died down because of COVID. I went back to Hong Kong, and then I was planning to stay in Hong Kong for good, honestly. And then the national security law was proposed and it was implemented in the city. And that's when the time I figured that there's a safety concerns for me to stay in Hong Kong. So it's either I stay in Hong Kong and being arrested and jailed, or I leave. Then I chose the latter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your experience like when you went back, though? Everything had kind of died down. I've heard a few people talk about how there were ways to try and suppress the protests that were rising, and they reference COVID-19 and stuff. What do you think of those claims?
Yeah, they're using COVID as an excuse to try to make people not to gather on the streets. So they have a rule at that time that you can't be in a party over 3 people. So if it's more than 3 people in an area for the same purpose, then you will get fined. You'll get basically a bill to get charged for violating that rule, obviously. And so they're using that rule to make people not to come to the streets. Yeah. So the movement kind of slowly died down after that.
Yeah. And did you know anybody in 2019 who was starting to lead up? Did you start building a network? I mean, there's so many young people that started to take leadership positions in the protests. Yeah. Did you connect with them, or how'd you get in that circle?
Obviously. A lot of them during the protests when I was in the U.S. or when I was back there, I got to meet them, and some of them even ran in the Democratic primaries at that time, and now they're in jail for doing that.
Okay, well, let's break that one down a little bit. So they ran for office knowing after what happened in the last situation where the guys were told, you no longer qualify, or they won the election and then they were told they couldn't be in office. Why did they run, your friends? Why did they run for the seats?
I feel like because for the 2 elected people who were being disqualified at that, back in 2016, they're pro-independence. Basically, they're supporting Hong Kong independence, and that's exactly on the red line of the CCP. Like, this is over crossing the line. Like, we don't allow this to happen. So, but then it doesn't mean pro-democracy would be criminalized. Like, we can, advocate for certain degree of democracy and freedom for Hong Kongers, because this is promised in the treaty during the handover, right? This is, it's supposed to be like that. So we're just trying to defend our rights. Versus those 2 that was being qualified, they're advocating for Hong Kong independence, which is more sensitive. So I guess at that time, people think that, well, the government has the right to disqualify us, but we have to step out and say, we are here. We're representing the people, the voice of people, and it's a very powerful time, a powerful primaries, because it has never happened before. There's never a democratic primaries in the city. It was organized. It was not organized by the government. It was only organized within the pro-democracy group. And they figured that because a lot of people want to run for office on our side, and so let's have a primaries. Which means that at that time, people a lot of people want to advocate. A lot of people on our side, they want to make changes. They want to take a seat in the office and try to overpower the other side, which is the pro-CCP people. And we did. Actually, in November 2019, there is another district election, which is, a different thing compared to the legislative. Think of it as state legislators.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. And so they're basically district councilor. And at that time, the democracy side won, have a huge victory. We really outnumbered the people on the pro-CCP side. That's when the time the government realized we're in danger, our power is in danger, because it seems like the majority is on our side, and so they have to take control of the next election. So that's why they criminalized the Democratic primaries in next year when they ran for another election. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I know
that makes
it's
sense.
very complicated.
That's the thing is, everybody watching has probably not heard a single thing about this. And so understanding the basics helps us, I think, all understand what's going on and China's role in this. So your friends ran for office. It was criminalized to do so. They were very courageous. I mean, I commend them a lot for doing so. They got arrested. Do you know what that looked like? Was it immediate, or were they?
It was a very tragic day, honestly. I woke up people in Hong Kong, they woke up, I think at 6 a.m. in the morning, saw a big news coming up on our phone that 47 people were arrested in that single morning. It was a mass arrest. It has never happened before.
Wow.
And all these people were connected to the Democratic primaries. They either ran for the election or they organized the primaries. And so they're all being arrested all at once. And as smart as the government can do, they didn't think of the capacity of the court. And so nothing actually they made no progress because there was so many people in the court. And the entire process took 2 or 3 days in the court. And eventually, these people, they could not get bail out, and they're being imprisoned for something, a crime that is not being, finalized.
Yeah. Okay. And so they're criminalized and arrested for running for office, and then they don't get proper process of justice. Yeah. What happened to them after this few days of the trials?
They're in jail.
In China?
No, in Hong Kong.
Hong Kong.
They're locked behind bars in Hong Kong. Waiting to be trialed. Yeah.
Wow. Can you explain the national security law for us a little bit?
Yes, it's a law that was implemented in Hong Kong on July 1st, 2020.
Okay.
At that time I was in Hong Kong. And it's to criminalize secession, subversion, terrorism, and collusion with foreign forces. It sounds like it's for national security, avoiding terrorism, all that. But what it actually does is to, you can get arrested for being on the street and basically saying a slogan of "Free Hong Kong," or if you are let's say someone was in contact with me, because I am, in the U.S. and I'm working, I'm doing all these activism, they can be charged for colluding with foreign forces. It's as simple as that, and it comes with a maximum sentence of life in prison.
Oh,
great! And then, and some of the cases can also be transferred to China for trial. So it didn't went through a proper legislative process. it being introduced to the legislative body, and they discuss about it, vote on it, whether it's passed or not. No, it's directly from the Chinese government, and they basically put this law in Hong Kong, and they announced it in, I believe it was like late May or like June at that time, and a month after that, it was in effect. It comes into effect, and people start to get arrested for their involvement in social movements. For example, one of the very common slogan during our movement was the "Revolution of our times." Liberate Hong Kong, Revolution of our times, and that slogan is already being criminalized because someone was being arrested for saying the slogan or bringing the flags up that shows the slogan.
Okay.
And as I mentioned, the 47 people who were arrested, they were also being charged under this law. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And so you were there when that got passed?
Yes, and that was the NSL, the National Security Law, was the reason why there is safety concerns for me to stay in Hong Kong.
Okay. And so how quickly did you plan to get out of the country?
We learned about this law probably like 1 or 2 months before it was implemented.
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably like I was aware of it, and then probably 1 or 2 months after that, I realized, I have to make a plan because it seems like it's gonna affect me. Because at that time when I learned about it, I still have a thought that maybe I'm not under the radar. Like maybe I would be lucky, or like I'm not that significance for them to chase after me. But no, like there are signs of them having me on the list, and because I know that for sure that their first targets would be the people who were involved in foreign policy or lobbying activism, in a foreign countries, and I was one of them when I was during the 2019 movement, and so right off the bat, I already know that I'm in danger, and the questions being like the questions left behind was, do I want to stay in Hong Kong and to accept this and to take whatever would come to me, or I leave Hong Kong and use this platform or like the freedom I have here in the US to kind of amplify the voice of people of Hong Kong.
Yeah, no, that seems to be the common question that people have for themselves in that moment of, do they stay and try and fight back, or do they stay and try and flee and let the world know what's going on? Because the information isn't exactly spread. So when you left, what were some of the major changes that happened in your life, and did you leave friends behind? The ones that were arrested, were they arrested before you left, or did they get arrested after?
Well, I have friends who were arrested during the movement, but as I mentioned, the 47 people, those prominent activists, they were arrested after the NSL was implemented.
Okay.
And they were being charged under that law. I came here, I came to the US after it was implemented. It was still like the year of 2020. And I would say I was very lucky because at least I lived here for 4 years during my college. And so it's not like I would have a hard time to get used to the way of living here. But it's still very heart-wrenching to accept know that you would never be able to return home. You would never be able to see some of the friends back there. And, you have to sever ties with your families and friends to keep them safe. These are, the realities that all the people who fled Hong Kong have to face. And I think we were all in the process of trying to, because we left Hong Kong and now we're freed. Like, from my perspective, I think I have a responsibility to do as much as I can to to, do whatever I can for Hong Kong and people who don't have a voice.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the difficulty, like the challenge is that you still have to balance your life. Like, this is not gonna help maintain your life. And so you need to have another job where like you have to try to live on your own without any help of others. And so emotionally, it would be difficult for a lot of us. So I feel like in the past 2 or 3 years, this is the process I'm taking.
And so is that the kind of journalism that you're focusing on now here in your career? Do you cover those situations?
Yeah, most of my work was actually more like on the production side instead of the reporting side. And most of the news are about the issues in Asia in general, in Hong Kong and China, and places in general China issue. And the reason why I said I couldn't be on the reporting side of journalists is because I'm half activist, and it's sometimes there is kind of a conflict of interest of you reporting something related, and so it's a part that also get me a little bit of time to get used to, because that's my dream, and now I kind of have to give up some part of it and to continue my activism, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you have to find the healthy balance. That makes sense. Maybe we'll get you into commentating. I'll help you out with that. It's a fun experience. So what's the situation right now in Hong Kong? Like, is there an update of, like, is there a new movement on the rise? Are people organizing to get rid of the NSL, or what's the last situation going on?
A street protest is probably impossible right now in Hong Kong.
Wow.
Everyone is being monitored. People are living in fear. I have talked to some of my friends, and they would tell me that even when they are scrolling through their phone, like looking on like social media, when they saw a particular piece of news about a political related news, they would have to think through, like, do I want to like this post? Because everything would be on record. And if they like this post, it could mean that they agree with what this person said, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's that level of, consciousness, is that they have to always pay attention to what they're doing, what they're saying. And so people in Hong Kong, they're just living their life. But I would say that there are still space for people to advocate for what they want to say. Like, they want to, even though our civil society shrink, but still a lot of people are holding up and trying to use the limited space capacity we have to advocate for a specific issue. Or, like, I would say that obviously freedom is not as much as we had back then, but people are still trying different ways to defend, to promote their culture. And I believe that the identity of Hong Kongers is well developed among the communities. People understand who they are, and they know the situation, and like the truth is that the government is trying to control us, and it's not something that Hong Kong people wanted.
Yeah. Well, and that sense of background and identity can be really powerful in something like this, and helpful for the situation.
Yeah.
So let's transition to kind of bigger picture stuff as we close out. You said you cover a lot of general China stories and stuff. Do you know what China wants from Hong Kong? Like, they had the 50-year agreement of letting it be until that timeline ended. What do you think is next?
Hong Kong is, I would describe it as the last defend of freedom, right? I don't want to say in China, like, because I don't think we're part of China, but we're the on the front line of defending civil rights and freedom, and for just basically a human being. And they are trying. Some people would argue that Hong Kong is not as important as it was before, but it's all about the dignity of the Chinese government. They want it, so they have to get it. And no matter how much it takes, they would still do it. But I would say that, Hong Kong is a very magical city. People understand how it's like to live in freedom. And so if you're taking it away from them, they know obviously that you're not doing good for them. Mm-hmm. And you can see people's voice is powerful. They are on the streets and they show the world that we don't stand with the values that they're trying to put into us. We are standing up. We have our own culture, we have our own values that we stand for, and we have our own identity. Like, why would you want to take away everything from us and try to make us and basically indoctrinate another set of mindsets and make us to love your country, right? I want to bring up one of the line, like the first sentence of the article I wrote in the article that I wrote in 2019. We all, like Hong Kong people, we all come from a city that are owned by a country that I don't belong to. And this is exactly what Hong Kongers feel, is that we're in this city that are owned by this country that we do not feel any belonging to. And it's difficult for us to think, oh, we are Chinese. Like, it's impossible to force someone to identify as Chinese if we don't agree with, like, we're Hong Kongers, right? And I feel like, China, what they're doing is that they're trying to expand to a superpower in the world. They're trying to infiltrate in different countries through investment, through technology, through education. And they also have a lot of students coming to the Western countries and using them as puppets to control, to censor speeches around the world. And all they wanted to, they just want to make the world follow their ways. And they're an expansionist. And what we can do right now is to contain them. We can use sanction. We can stop investment from China. We can reject any sort of technology from China. For example, you see what's happening with the 5G technology, or like that are in the US or around the world. Mm-hmm. And they're not following the rules. And they're using technology to censor speeches around the world. For example, like the very popular app, TikTok, it's created in China. And this is one of the platforms that they use to put propaganda. They're using that to get into people's life and make you feel like there's no way back. Like you can't live without TikTok right now, and you can't live with this technology, that technology, and then eventually, we're relying on the product of China, the service of China, and by that time it will be too late. There are many things that we can do to defend or like to protect human rights and freedom.
Yeah.
And the first thing, very important thing, is to, stop infiltration from China.
Speaking of that, I wanted to transition into this, so I'm glad you brought it up. I mean, there's a lot of ways we could go about this. One with TikTok, for example, the propaganda that's spread, the media that's spread. Have you seen the sources explaining what young Chinese children are being exposed to by the CCP versus what is being exposed to young American children, and how there's some sort of manipulation of the culture going on where they're trying to kind of like decay American culture and corrupt young kids with the crap that's on TikTok. Whereas they're trying to make their children in China as educated and strong and mentally capable as possible. And so it's this way of attacking our country from within. What do you think about the fact that young people like us use TikTok, don't care, wear products made from China, don't care, and really haven't even opened their eyes to any of this? Are you concerned by this complete obliviousness?
I am. Yeah, obviously, because if you go on Amazon, all the products are made in China. It's almost impossible for us to avoid a Chinese product. And believe it or not, some of them, they might be made by Uyghur slaves.
Yeah.
Right? And we know that the US government, the Congress recently passed an act to prevent Uyghur forced labor products to come to the US. Basically, companies from like China, when they want to import, any products, they have to prove to the custom that it's not produced by the Uyghur forced labor. So they have to give certificates and proof that it's not produced by these people. Mm-hmm. Then they can come in and sell it in our country. But it's still, there are a lot of ways for them to go in the, midway and to sneak through the law. Yeah. And so it's almost impossible to avoid these products. And people are not aware of what they're using. People are not aware of how these technology, how these different software or apps are stealing our information. They're harming our security too. And some people, they're using these, and why did I say it's harming freedom of speech here is because they have these people coming and, sometimes it's the Chinese students who come to this school, and when a Hong Kong student says something criticizing the Chinese government, they would immediately just bash them and, create huge backlash and threaten them. Because I have experienced that. I received death threats from Chinese students before. I was being tailed, followed by Chinese people when I was a student.
In America?
Yes, when I was in Boston.
So are these just incredibly indoctrinated Chinese students that are sent over, or are they like the kids of the CCP officials?
They can be indoctrinated, and they can be actually hired by the CCP as secret police. Yeah.
That come to America as college students.
And actually, when you look up, there's a recent report by the State Department that they arrested 4 people that are that seems to be hired by the CCP as secret police and to infiltrate and got into organizations in the U.S. that are advocating for Uyghur rights and Hong Kong rights.
Interesting.
They're in the circle just like everyone else, and
maybe we have one here.
Yeah, maybe.
Looking at you, cameraman Dan. I'm just kidding. Sorry, I had to do that. So, I mean, speaking of this info, you never know.
They are trying to hire people within our community. Even people it can be an assumption or a reality is that they would, not to take the Hong Kong as an example, but maybe in the Uyghur community, well, it happens before, is that someone who experienced Chinese oppression eventually hired by the CCP to censor the people in their community. It happened in New York before in the Tibetan community, which one of the Tibetan was found that was connected with the CCP, and that person was actually within the Tibetan community, and they are all friends with. He's all like friends with other Tibetan in that area, and
Jeez.
yeah, he was quite active. Actually.
So it's similar to the concept of elite capture. Did you hear about this? Of they're trying to get the elites of our country, not just the politicians, but the business leaders, community leaders, organization leaders, and stuff.
It sounds very impossible to think, oh, there's spy everywhere. It's like it sounds like it's a drama or something, but it actually happens everywhere. Yeah. I can say very confidently is that there must be one person, like a spy within a, in a U.S. in an American school, among the Chinese students, because they were told, they were educated that when they see something, they have to report it to the government. Maybe they're not hired by the government, but they would report it to the government when they see something.
What are they doing? Are they trying to find people like you that have a connection back to China, or what are they trying to do with this information?
If you're saying something bad about China and they don't like it, and they know obviously this person is harming our national security, which I think it's only harming their dignity, I guess, then they will report it to the department in China. There are ways for them to do that, and they were being told before they come to the U.S. or go to other countries is that you have to report everything you see that are wrong, that seems wrong to you, to us.
Do you think that they have somebody in media companies as well? I mean, or are they paying people off? Because do you remember that article? Maybe it was Washington Post or New York Times, I can't remember, but it praised communist China for their great, efficient, top-down approach to solving COVID.
Yes.
And it's who writes something like that? It's called communism. Who writes something like that? Are they slipping money to American journalists, or like they did, Nazi Germany did back then? This has been repeated patterns seen throughout American media whenever there is a world situation going on. They're easily bought off. And so I'm not surprised you have people like Fang Fang and Eric Swalwell, is that what his name is? Do you remember that? He was having romantic relations.
I know which incident that you're talking about.
With a Chinese spy, and he's a member of Congress. So we could find a ton of these examples, and now you have the situation with the Biden administration, and everybody knows what I'm talking about with that one. What are your thoughts on that, of not just having infiltration of spies on college campuses, but in media, in high political offices?
Media, high political offices, or world organizations, they all seems to have connections with China. It's crazy to think, media companies, they can, where is their money from? Investment. There would be a shareholder that has connections with China. And the bigger the share is, they would be able to monitor what the news they're covering or commentary that they're writing. Right, this is censorship on free press. And why did I bring up world organizations? Because during COVID, we see what happened in WHO. They did not admit the pandemic. They didn't try to they didn't warn the world. They didn't alert the world early enough when they found out there is a virus in China. And they try to cover up for China until it actually broke out in the world for 1 month or 2 months. Then eventually WHO admit that it's a pandemic. That's when people realize, we're screwed. The pandemic is hitting us. And they continue to cover up for China. And take, for example, the United Nations, China is part of it, and the U.S. is part of it. The Western countries, they would say, draft a statement condemning what China is doing, but there's no action by the UN as a whole to whatever sanction China or condemn what's happening in China, the human rights violations and all that. China, it's still a member of the Human Rights Committee in the UN. How is that possible?
Yeah.
Right? And there's no efforts to take them away, even with the Uyghur genocide, with what's happening in Tibet, with in southern Mongolia, in Hong Kong. There's so many evidence of human rights violations, and they're taking absolutely nothing, no measures or efforts to take them away. And not to mention, Taiwan is not even part of it. It's not even a member of the UN.
Yeah. It's just another example.
Yeah.
Now, so, I mean, this is like the largest global levels, and then down to something as small as a college campus in America, a small one.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see us starting to have any positive impact? Like what are you focusing on in the future? How can we and the people watching be more aware of things, start to help out, and how can we like wrap this up on some sort of positive, hopeful note? And I know it's not a quick fix, but what are your visions for how we can move forward?
We just talked about U.S. campuses, and I think there are a lot we can do to help the situation there. For example, I don't know if you've heard of the Confucius Institute.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's another education program created by China as a promotion of their Chinese culture. That's just a better term to shape propaganda, and they're using that to. It's in a lot of U.S. campuses, and in recent years, a lot of them got shut down because people start to realize it's not a simple education department at the school. Is actively censoring lectures and information about China in U.S. campuses.
Wow.
Yes,
So get rid of those.
They would, get rid of those, and there must be students like me, like a Hong Kong student, a Uyghur student, Chinese dissident student, any students. When they speak up, when they criticize Chinese government, we should support them. We should, stand up and stand with them to show our support, because oftentimes the Chinese students' populations are too big, their community is too big, and a lot of times they just pressure the school to either settle things or condemn what the other side was saying. Exactly what happened to me too. Like, my school didn't address the entire situation. Like, I was being threatened. I was being, called out by students at my school, but they didn't do anything to help me, to support me.
Yeah.
For saying, for me practicing freedom of speech. They didn't protect me, and they basically silently stand with violence. They stand with threats, right? And I think this has to be changed. The school administrations, they should stop to silently stand with Chinese students when they are when the Chinese students are actively censoring what other people are saying, their criticism against Chinese governments. Yeah. They should, do the right thing. Threatening people is not right.
No. And what's crazy is I'm sure that it's not just the Chinese students, but I kind of want to wrap up by hearing what you think about the fact that there's so many Americans these days, young Americans especially, about, at least a majority. The numbers are different with every poll, but now officially over a majority of young Americans would choose socialism and communism over economic independence and capitalism. Mm-hmm. And like, how do you feel about that, where you left that situation to seek asylum in America? You're now an asylee. Is that what it's called? Asylee?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And now you have to deal with the fact that a majority of people your age here in this country are falling for those same dangerous ideas. What are your thoughts on that? And what's your kind of closing message for the people that are being misled? They aren't necessarily communists, but they're being misled by some radical people, and they deserve to hear your side of the story. They deserve to hear the real information. And I think they would be on our side if they did.
Mm-hmm. I always say this, freedom is not free. And freedom is so precious especially at the time it was taken away. Like you wouldn't realize how important it is unless it's taken away from you, and you would realize like, you know, a lot of the things that you're doing, the freedom you have, actually give you the liberty and, you know, give you, basically shape our way of living in America, right? I think there are a lot of people, they fall into the mindset of, you know, if you're against the Chinese government, then we are against Chinese people, we're racist. And that's not right. That's an ideology that the Chinese government is trying to shape it. But the reality is that we're criticizing the government. We're not against a population of people. And it's certainly not Asian hate to say CCP it's not right, you know, violating human rights. We're here we're in America. We should utilize the freedom of speech and our space to advocate for people who are suffering. There are still people who are suffering in political persecution due to their political stance or their religious practice or whatever cultural background they are. And you don't see these people because the government do not want them to say things. They don't want information to get out from their mouth. But these people are actively being monitored, censored, and oppressed by the Chinese government. And I bet no one wants that to happen in their country. And so if we let China to continue their influence here in the US, that would be a big issue. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this is happening actually. So we have to, you know, pay more attention and don't think that you don't matter, like your voice matter, and, you know, pay more attention to what's going on in Tibet and Hong Kong and in East Turkestan. Like these things they are on the front, like these people are on the front line of defending freedom. And the next people, like after Hong Kong, it will be the world.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. What a closing statement. That was a good one. Frances, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for
appreciate
having
it. Thanks
me.
for coming down to Dallas. And we're just really thankful you come share your story.
Thank you.
Do you have a YouTube channel and everything?
Yes.
All right. We'll link that in the description of the show so that people can stay connected to you. But thank you again.
Cool. Thank you.
Hey guys, it's Morgan. Before we head out, I just want to say thank you for watching The Freedom Records, and thank you so much to American Journey Experience for letting us film here in Dallas, Texas at their vault. You guys, this place is filled with world and American history artifacts. It's fascinating to learn the details of the objects that are right behind us on set. So thank you to American Journey Experience for letting us film here, and actually, you guys can come here yourself, so go to the link in our bio to learn how you can do that and how you can get connected to this great place.